Thank you all very much, and let me just congratulate you on gathering here under the auspices of the Foreign Policy Association, especially to honor this remarkable man. I'm always heartened in New York by these occasions that go on every night in one hotel or another. I don't think that there's an appreciation either in this country or around the world, for that matter, about the philanthropy of New York City, and especially the intellectual commitment that so many people have to one cause or another. I now have said over the years that in hotel rooms like this, and especially the Waldorf, I've been at the podium so long that at the Waldorf, I know the waiters' grandsons, because the waiters have retired and their grandsons are now doing the job. So honestly, this is a tribute to all of you as well. I've been thinking at this stage in my life for a variety of reasons. I've been a political journalist for a half a century now in America. I'm of a certain advanced age at this time, and as some of you may know, I went through a difficult health situation in the last almost 2 years now, and that prompted me to think a little more about where we are in the world and what my own judgment is about that and the kind of attitudes that I have personally, and maybe I can use whatever profile I have to advance a couple of concepts. The first concept is what I call the big idea. I think that we're at a place in America where we no longer have the big idea as part of our daily dialogue. In fact, if you look at the current political debate in America, the big idea is to think small, not big. And yet, this country, the formation of this country, there was never any bigger idea in the history of the world. These people came here seeking political and religious freedom during the age of the Enlightenment, and they created on this wilderness a republic. And Thomas Jefferson was the man with his rainbow pen, as I describe it, who gave voice to the idea that all people are created equal, that we have certain unalienable rights. Now, the exercise of those rights was not perfect for too long, and we're still struggling, obviously, with some of those rights in terms of how we get along racially. But that big idea was unheard of and unheralded in world history. And it really launched a series of democratic republics that are still playing out now. Now, the next big idea, of course, was when Abraham Lincoln came along and decided that he would sign the Emancipation Proclamation and risk a civil war to do what was right for this country. And then we had a succession of big ideas that came along after that. The Roosevelt cousins, Teddy Roosevelt, who busted the trust and created the national park system. His cousin Franklin, who wheeled himself into the White House. And in so doing, he came up with innovative ideas to lift this country up out of the Depression and then prepared America for the greatest war in the history of mankind. And before that war was over, Congress, even though we were deeply in debt, had the big idea that we would have a GI Bill of Rights, one of the most important pieces of domestic legislation in the history of this country. It prepared those returning veterans, many of whom were junior high dropouts, not just high school dropouts, to go to college, something they had never considered, or to technology schools. And so when the war ended, America was ready at that point to take advantage of the economic opportunities and create the modern industrial world, the likes of which we are now all the beneficiaries of. Those were big ideas. John Kennedy will go to the moon, big idea. Dr. Martin Luther King, nonviolence and trusting in the rule of law to take on race, a big idea. Richard Nixon, a lot of bad big ideas, but he had one very good big idea, and that was we're going to open relations with China. Ronald Reagan, who came to office thinking that he'll do whatever it takes to bring down the Soviet Union, and then was persuaded that there could be a much softer landing. And so potentially the greatest confrontation, again in the history of mankind, ended without a shot being fired. The 60s gave us the big idea of more tolerance, women beginning to take their place in the world as they certainly deserve to. Silicon Valley, a big idea that is still playing out, and it's changing us every day. And what was the motto of Silicon Valley? Be destructive. Challenge the conventional. Be disruptive. figure out how you can do what is taken for granted in a new and more efficient way. And what brings you here today is another big idea. The idea, it seems to me at least, that there are two fundamental concepts that we should all keep in mind. That we should be proactive citizens in our own country, but at the same time, given the problems that exist in the world today that pay no attention to political or even military barriers, we have to think about being global citizens. And I can't think of anyone of his generation, certainly, or in the world of finance today, who has that in his every waking moment than the man you honor here tonight, Louis Bacon. He is not only a citizen of the United States, extraordinarily successful in his chosen field, of course, but he's also a global citizen. And he is completely involved, thinking constantly about one of the great threats that we have not just in America, but around the world that is going to require global cooperation of the highest order. And that, of course, is climate change and the warming that is going on. Now, there's enormous resistance to that in too many parts of the American political system. So it's going to require the best efforts of all of us. But most of all, it's going to take a big idea on how to get it done. And frankly, as someone who's done 3 documentaries now on climate change, and I can tell you that you do get a lot of pushback, especially from some people who are in the key political positions in Washington, to either resist it or help it along, and too many of them are resisting. I'm here to tell you that I am so reassured to know that my friend Louis Bacon now is taking his place in the forefront of this extraordinarily important challenge before all of us that has an impact on everything that we think about. It has an impact on the security of the world. At the Pentagon, they have study groups going constantly, worrying about what happens to China if global warming wipes out their ability to produce their own food. What will happen to their military appetite at that point? How voracious will it be? What happens in the coastal areas of the Pacific area and how much disruption that could cause from a military and geopolitical point of view? So this is something that it's not just in a textbook or to be debated on PBS. It's something that affects every one of us, wherever we live and whatever we do. And so we should be very, very grateful that this remarkable man who has had so much success in his life in his chosen field, who could sit back and do what he loves to do best, which is to be in the outdoors at his ranch in Colorado, where, by the way, he has put in easement hundreds of thousands of acres so they will be preserved forever. But instead, he's here tonight as your honoree, willing to give his voice and a fair amount of his capital and to address his friends as well, and he has so many of them, to join in the great crusade to make sure that we give our very best efforts to save this precious planet. I'll leave you with one final story before I bring Louis to the stage. One of my very favorite stories of the space age involved Jim Lovell, who was one of the astronauts on the Apollo mission that first scouted the moon lunar surface. He was later the guy in Apollo 13 who said, "Houston, we have a problem." I always describe him as Tom Hanks, and then everybody understands who he is. Jim Lovell was on the first mission to the moon. They didn't really know what to expect because no one had seen the back surface of the moon before. And when they began to drift around the moon, he said they all rushed to the portholes of the spaceship so they could look at that gray, lifeless, granular surface. And then as they drifted by, in the inky blackness of outer space, they saw something that took their breath away. No man had ever seen it from that perspective before. It was Mother Earth. It was this beautiful blue, little tiny marble out there with the great white cumulus clouds, the deep green of the rainforest, the deep blue of the oceans that cover 70% of the Earth. And he could imagine those heavily populated urban areas, not just in North America or in China, but in the Middle East as well. And as he looked at it, one thought came to him, this astronaut. That's our spaceship, he thought. We all have a place in taking care of it. And so that's what brings us here tonight, this spaceship called Mother Earth. And the captain that you honor tonight is my friend Louis Bacon. Louis, if you would come forward, please.